Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and however you are listening to us on this episode, it is absolutely fantastic to have you here today. This episode is entitled Corporate Social Responsibility, but the real question is, do corporations think they're above corporate social responsibility? As usual, it's been triggered by some things that we've seen in the press, such as how some organisations have handled the furlough scheme, and also other things that have come into conversation. I'm joined by the tenacious and insightful Stu Trevena and the great and powerful Kevin Green. It was a great episode for the three of us. It really helped us think through some of our thinking, and of course I hope it adds value for you as well. We have some great guests coming up on further episode. I have Clara Min, who is the global head of franchise sales for Adidas. I've also got Dave Ulrich, the HR guru, coming on an episode probably next week, actually. I think when I've done the editing on that. That's a really great episode. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to him. And of course, here comes my final request. Please tell people about the podcast Leadership Bites. It means a lot to us. We're putting a lot of effort into it. We're getting a lot of value back. We're getting great comments, and we're trying to grow this. The more people listen to the episodes, then the more appealing I am to the bigger names, and the more we can entice them to come on and have conversations with us. So subscribe, tell people, bang it out on LinkedIn, put it out on your social media, do whatever you can do. You can even get a t-shirt printed if you want. Obviously that would be insane, but it would be awesome. On that note, enjoy the episode. Welcome to Leadership Bites with your host Guy Bloom, a leadership podcast, conversations, just me talking and occasional interviews. Check us out at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and tell everyone. Great to have you both on. So hi Kev, hi Stu.
Hi.
You both say hi at the same time, so it sounds like there's just one of you. Hi Stu.
Hello, good morning.
How are you, mate?
We're very well, thank you.
Set us up with what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so this podcast, I guess it's stimulated from an article that was written about Sports Direct. And like a lot of organisations right now, Sports Direct and House of Fraser, part of the same group, took advantage of the government's furlough scheme, allowing the government, I think, to subsidise salaries while businesses take a bit of a dip with the economy doing what it's doing. So their staff were furloughed, but then it transpires that some of the staff are actually asked to work 1 day a week during their time on furlough to do things. The article says things like stock check, and I guess there's some other things that might need to do to keep the business ticking over. And this was then made public. There was an article written about it, and then the Sports Direct made a bit of a U-turn about it. And I guess the question it's caused us to ask ourselves is, do companies believe that they are above social good? Do they have other agendas at times that they place a greater level of importance in, rather than the social impact they could be having with their people, with the environment, with other organisations, etc. So that's the article, that's the question. So do companies believe they're above social good? Discuss.
My start point is I don't believe companies do believe they are above social good, but I believe individuals starting at a senior level of an organisation cave to the pressures of winning or being competitive. And on this occasion, here's a government furlough scheme. My employees are getting wages, although they're not coming from me, the employer, they are getting wages. So if I'm being led by pressure of whatever it takes, just get the job done. Yeah, but how do you want me to go? I don't care, just get the job done. Maybe I can win on a stringent dashboard, on a set of metrics, but I can use the furlough scheme, and then that doesn't even appear on my accounting, my spreadsheet, on my cost base. So I think people bow to competitive pressure because they have weak ethics or something like that, but I don't believe any organisation starts out with, we are above social good and we'll make up our own rules.
is I don't think they have a belief about that, but I think they do have another agenda of things that are more important than social good. And I think that's what we see. So what we see is the behaviour, the stuff that gets demonstrated, but I think that's a demonstration of what they hold to be truly important at that moment in time. And we've said on one of the other podcasts as well, I am always a bit cautious about, I think the articles we read start the conversations, but they are exactly that. They're a snapshot view. I think the other thing with Sports Direct as well, they're in the news quite a lot as an organisation for a few different reasons. I think 0 hours contract, there's been a lot of conversations with them around how they treat and manage their people. When we had the lockdown, when the lockdown first started, I don't know if you guys saw this, and it was closed, that it was said that non-essential shops should close. And Sports Director, I think it was Mike Ashley, and I don't want to quote him as saying this, or a spokesperson for the organisation had said, well, we are an essential shop. It's essential that people have access to exercise equipment and such like. But what they also did, the price of their exercise exercise equipment online instantly went up as well. We've got an organisation that's got a commercial responsibility to generate profit. What's the balance between that and doing what's right? And should we compare those two? And is there a need for us to do that? So I guess that's maybe where we get to it. So I don't think it's a belief we are above social good. I think it's what's our priority right now and on a whole as an organisation.
Right, well, that's the end of the podcast. Thanks. There
we go.
That's it. 6 minutes, we've agreed that organisations do not think they'll be for social good. No, that's it.
No, that literally.
So
have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend. Nice to have seen you. In fact, that could be a new thing, the 7-minute podcast. I have a perspective that just wants to go back to your statement, Cav, which is, I don't think it's companies, I think it's individuals. And at this point, we do have to ask the question, when do we reference the company as having its own identity and not saying, well, it's not the company, it's the people? At what point are we actually saying, no, it is the company? And when we say that, we're really referencing the senior team or the MD and not separating them out as being two different things. Because the company, by definition, is inanimate and is not a human being. So by definition, it's technically correct. But if we make that separation verbally, which is technically correct, I think it gives a get out of jail free card for people to go, well, either it's not me, it is the company, or, well, it's not the company, it's him or her.
So I think we can start to think about measuring that when it becomes systemic, i.e. present most of the time. So using the Sports Direct example, Stu's already pointed out accurately that they were in trouble not so long ago. They have had articles around sweatshop environments, sweatshop cultures, 0-hour working contracts, and now you're using 80% of people's salaries to get them in for free labour. So then it's probably the company led by a leadership team that says, let's get this done. Yeah, but how should we get it done? I don't care. By whatever means necessary, you just need to continue hitting your dashboard. So that's when it becomes the company, when it's frequent and regular.
I like that. So there's something here that says when we can say it's their cumulative way of behaving, when we look at them as an entity, that is what we see as being their inherent way of being. That's when we start to say, no, those two things are the same thing.
I quite like that cumulative way of being. There's lots of thought and conversations about purpose and why organisations exist. And I think the whole CS, the corporate social responsibility, I think it means different things to different organisations. It's seen slightly differently. So I think some places it means you get 2 days off to go and paint your local park or do something like that. And I think it can almost feel a bit of a process. Whereas I do think there are other organisations that have that cumulative way of being. It is part of their way of being and it is why they exist. I'll give you an example, I guess, which is maybe reflective of time right now. And I think I've referenced this organisation on another podcast we did. They're called Northern Monk Brewco. Brewery based down in Leeds. Great organisation, fairly young organisation, finding their own way, really kind of independent. Community and their role in community has been prevalent throughout. So there's lots of examples of this. So working with local charities, the organisation was started, the founder was actually left £5,000 by his grandmother. What the organisation now does is within the northeast area, they now offer £5,000 grants to local upcoming businesses that want to get set up. So it's they do lots of good things. Part of what they are, go on the website, it's all about them. Right now, obviously in the UK with the closure of pubs, business probably isn't looking great for them. And I think they would be forgiven for not having so much focus on that part of their business. You know, it's all about survival, but actually they're continuing to do that because it is their cumulative way of being. So fairly recently they were doing free beer for NHS. You didn't have to prove your NHS. They were sending stuff out in the post and you had a little handwritten letter of thanks from where they are. And I think that's maybe something around social good. I think, do we do it when the pressure's off? Or is there something about when the pressure's on, maybe we really know what our cumulative way of being is?
Stu, I know this puts you on the spot a little bit, but that client of yours, do they have a set of company values that they can anchor onto that reminds them on an everyday basis that we're here for the greater good?
Yeah, so this is this is a bit embarrassing. So working with them, one of the original sessions we did was actually to define those, and now you have put me on the spot. I can't remember what they were. But
I get that, mate. I get why you wouldn't be able to recite them easily, but I wonder if some of the answer lies in, is there a set of company values that we at all times hold ourselves accountable to and we can anchor onto during times of crisis? Or are we so flaky and flimsy that we just go all out to win no matter what the social cost to me?
Anchoring onto them is good, but I do like that word of cumulative. It's a way of being, because I'm sure we've all been through organisations and their values are great sounding words and they might be displayed in like the reception of a grand building, but I guess your values are through what's demonstrated. What do we experience? What do we kind of feel? And I guess where you've said that thing about grounding, I think is this holding us to account for what we say we exist for? And I think they're very clear on that here. And I think it's not that other organisations aren't above social good. I guess it's, are they clear on what their role is in providing that? I think that might be something slightly different. Maybe their priorities have been a more traditional margin growth, whereas actually we know now that consumers, employees, we look for more from organisations than just good products, good services. We look that they do good, that they are environmentally sustainable, they're morally just.
Yeah, because I know that the retail sector is particularly brutal most of the time, but right now they're really struggling. But you never hear stories of like this around a company like, what would you say, John Lewis? You don't hear stuff like the news we're talking about, the kick off this podcast based on John Lewis examples. But the downside of this, they're probably not too far away from having to close stores because it's commercially so tight out there.
Well, that's fascinating, isn't it? Where we talk about the reality of whether or not being socially geared actually ends up as adding value. And if we look at the organisations maybe that don't propose to be of great value socially, and they're almost quite clear about what they're about, we're here to make money, then we've got those ones that offer themselves almost as a marketing tool as being a class apple in that space, from things like throttling batteries to where they have their manufacturing plants. Now, if their manufacturing plants had high levels of social good and justice going on in them, then I'd be okay with that. But indicators said that that's not the case. So there's the pretense at caring. And then there are those companies that have an absolute genuine intent for adding value. And I wonder at what point that becomes not sustainable. It's okay when it's me. It's okay when I'm a startup. It's okay when there's 100 of us, 200 of us, etc. But if we go national, international, can we maintain that? And then, of course, what we do get, and I'm just dealing with an organisation right now, they had a very high ethic at start off, but they've been bought out. They're owned by private equity investors. Their dynamic has changed. On a Friday, they went to bed as this very socially aware and just organisation. And on Monday, they woke up with a debt to pay, and the entire dynamic changed over the weekend. And it's just this almost, what is sustainable? And if a company's going to get to a certain size and have a certain commercial strategy, can it maintain it? Is it able to? Are there any large, really viable organisations that have that balance correct?
So I believe there is, and I'll give you an example because I've come prepared this week. I've got an example, but before I give that, just to go back where you said about adding value, do you mean we add value to an organisation's adding value through society, or they're adding value to their brand through doing it? Because I think the two are very different.
Yeah, I actually
what do you mean by that?
I do believe that the first point of responsibility sits with adding value to the people that work within the organisation. And that means ensuring that they have an environment where they are safe, they are nurtured and grown, so they don't go home bullied, etc. And by definition then infect the people around them in their own environment, which then damages society almost at that level. So if you've got 500 employees, they all know 5 people, 500 times 25 kind of thing that can have an impact. So I think at that level. And then I think there's something about do no harm, which is while we're doing what we are doing, making money, being of value to our owners, the people within inside the business, let's do no harm. Let's not leave a footprint that damages. And then I think then there's a third tier on that, which is how and where can we add value to the world? And that doesn't have to be at a grand level, but where is our value in the community?
Okay, I'm kind of with you on that because I think we take it very seriously because it adds or detracts from our brand value. I think your motive for doing it is different. And I think that's where we see things when the pressure is on, maybe that slides away a little bit because our original intent for doing it was more self-serving, I think.
Well, let me just jump in on that for a second, and I will edit this bit out because I know you haven't read the book, which is in the book, which I will edit this bit out as well.
Is there a book?
I'm editing this bit out.
Do you know what?
I'm editing it out. No, I'm not. Which is...
If anyone didn't know, Guy's written a book and I haven't read it because I have, quite frankly, got better things to do in my time. But
you should have Stu, because you're in it.
Oh, God. So, anyway, the point is, in my book. In the book, I talk about corporate social responsibility, and actually, let's do away with that word corporate and just call it social responsibility.
Okay, yeah.
Because to me, the reason that I'm being a little bit pedantic about that is corporate social responsibility is, I think you mentioned it, we give people a day a year to go and do something in charity-wise or something like that. That is fantastic, but it is almost tick done. It is almost a marketing exercise to say it has been achieved. If we had a mentality or a mindset of social responsibility, then actually I think it would take on a different dynamic. So just so you know, when I talk, that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, okay, cool. That's good to have that as your kind of frame of reference. I think just to go back, you said about large organisations that start up, the growth level, it might be easier to keep a focus on that, and then maybe the commercial pressures increase, and can that be sustainable, I think was the point you made. So there are a couple of organisations, I think, out there that still continue to do this. So a couple that stand out there. So Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream manufacturers we know and love, a huge amount of what they do is lobbying for and protecting family farming. And they're big supporters of Farm Aid in the US. So it's almost they're looking at the suppliers and they use their position to support that industry. And I don't think it's necessarily to serve them because they are their suppliers. I think they use their position as an influencer and as a lobbyer to protect an area that they have closeness to. So that's, I guess, an example. That doesn't necessarily require a financial investment. That's something about the position we hold. And I think that was your other point around, is it sustainable? And we spoke about the financials. You can go online and look at it. So RepTrack is reputation tracking, essentially. It's a website you can go on and it tracks the most reputable brands on the planet. And they do that via looking at things like innovation, performance, leadership. But one of the things that they look at is what they call citizenship, which is essentially how does the organisation behave in the wider society? What do they do? Number one organisation in that list is Lego. And for lots of they do lots of things when you go about it. When I started reading about this, what I thought was quite interesting, in 2014, they ended a 50-year partnership with Shell. It came from drilling in the Arctic. And this 50-year partnership is, the Shell garages were used as places where Lego toys were sold. That partnership was estimated at about £68 million. Yet they made a stand, they took a call to do that. And I think there's something around, is it sustainable? Commercially sustainable, you'd say, well, no, because I'm making a loss. But is that the right thing to do for them? Because actually that's that whole thing we said, it's our cumulative way of being. We do what is good for outside. I think it can be done. I think it requires intentional focus and being clear on the reasons why you exist and what's important to you as an organisation.
So that's interesting, isn't it? Again, we're in a world of devil's advocates, so I don't know. One choice there was that they did that exactly for those reasons, where somebody turned around and said, you do know that actually we shouldn't be partnered with that organisation. And they looked at each other and went, Blummeneck, you're right. Yeah, we'll have to stop it. Right. Boom. And that's a massive tick in the box. The other side of that coin is, right, this is going to be really painful. If somebody makes the connection between who we are and what they are, then actually that's going to damage us. And maybe those
and just
things
on that guy, that was out there. So it was out there, and there had been messages and things on YouTube about it. And I think so. I make that point as not the reason I think they're a reputable brand and they sit in that list and they are socially responsible. I think that's an example. I think if you have there's lots of things about education and all this kind of stuff as well.
But I think it's okay. I think it's like somebody getting feedback from a colleague, isn't it? I may be having a behaviour that it takes a while for somebody to bring it to my attention. My humanity is the fact that I'm not perfect. It gets pulled to my attention, and then for whatever reason, I then recognise it and adapt. So the fact that they have made that decision is in essence the laudable thing. So I don't think this is about perfection. And I think, again, in this day and age of people being in the world and people going back into their tweets 7 years ago to find something negative they said, if we all live in
judged
fear,
by what was right then rather than what's right now.
Exactly. Yeah. And if we live in a world where we're absolutely fearful of doing anything, then we'll be generic, right? And we'll be vanilla. So deals get made, they're the right thing at the right time, the wrong thing at the right time, who knows? But actually we mature, we grow, and we make these decisions. So I praise and laud them for going, look, wherever our motives for getting into it, we've now got new motives to get out of it, right?
Yeah.
And I had the same thing when I worked for an organisation that made the decision that they were happy to work with a tobacco company. And at that moment, I realised that the entire culture had lost its way, or maybe not lost its way, had gone down a different path that then wasn't going to be my way. Because up until that point, there had been not written down in values, but there'd been an understanding that as an organisation, it wanted to do good. And it wanted to be associated with organisations that did good. The tobacco company opportunity came up, and I found myself, as a gainfully employed individual, sat in that situation situation where I was actually leading the team on trying to get business, and it kept nagging at me. And when I got back to the office and sat down with the senior team, I said something which was, and I paraphrase myself here, but if we work with this organisation, are we going to put their logo on our website? And if we do good work with them, are we going to enter awards with them? And then if we win one, are we then going to publicise that? And they went, no. I went, well, there we are then. So from that perspective, that financial driver outweighed, because of where the company was. It wasn't precarious financially, but it could have really done with the money. It's that driver of what pulls organisations that are essentially full of blinking great people, because it was an organisation that had blinking great people in it, but that money drove them to work or want to work with an organisation that they themselves didn't want to. And I think there's a lot of that.
And Guy, what started to happen with your relationship with that organisation when it started to cross your personal values?
Yeah, it was the first of two things that happened that made me go, I'm out of here. Wasn't I'm walking out the door tomorrow, but it was part of my decision that I need to now move on to pastures new. I think these things do have an impact, and they may have an impact on the way that people are attracted to work with a company, or whether or not they want to stay with an organisation. Maybe when they get to a place of financial security, maybe there's two times that you can make a decision, right? When I haven't joined you yet, and when I've got enough financial security that I can decide to move on, and as long as I haven't locked myself into a financial need where I daren't leave you. I think that's interesting enough where some organisations lose good people who have a lot of experience because they now don't want to work in that environment. So I think it does have its problems for organisations.
The reason I asked you that is because you said three things earlier, and that is an organisation has a responsibility to do a good duty for its people, to do no harm for society, and to add value to the world, i.e. let's make a profit, let's be commercially sound. And you then said, when is that unsustainable, or when does it start to flirt with being unsustainable? And my answer to that is when it, number one, breaks the law, i.e. you can't pay people that are on furlough, you can't give them money from the government and then put them to work. Then step two would be if it breaks organisational values. And number three, to your story now, if it starts to break individuals' values, that's when it starts to become unsustainable.
Yeah, so with that in mind, and I wonder if, like everything else, there's a distribution curve. And of course, there are people in organisations who are operating, when we meet them, we know that they are absolutely self-centred and they are all about financial gain and output. So by definition, the organisation is going to operate like that. Almost, I think there's a distribution curve with those borderline sociopaths, or whatever we want to call them, in existence. Therefore, the organisation, the culture is like that. I would actually say that Royal Bank of Scotland was like that when Fred Goodwin was in charge. My experience of that would be that that was an organisation that absolutely driven by the mania of somebody at the top who had no social conscience at all, was driven to a set of outputs that led to a whole financial collapse, and he was part of that way of being. But I do wonder if other organisations, the majority in the middle, have a ongoing conflict with, we're good people, we absolutely intend to do the right thing unless it starts going wrong. And by that I mean we're not making the money that we need to make. And I wonder if that then drives behaviours such as working people harder than we should do, or this furlough scheme, it's fantastic. I mean, it's not fantastic, we're in an awful situation, but if we're not careful, we're going to shut down in a month or so. So let's bring some of them in, do a bit of work, tell them not to say that they're working, because if not, nobody's going to have a job. And we all look at each other and go, look, I know it's the wrong thing to do, but we can be good afterwards,
and
right?
you start to convince yourself then.
Yeah. So good people doing the wrong thing because it's the right thing to do, if that makes sense.
And you could even start to convince yourself that you're doing it for the good of your employees, i.e. my people have bills to pay, so if I just take a bit of a shortcut with this scheme, maybe I can continue to pay their bills through their salaries, because we'll be alive in 6 months' time instead of shutting down in 3 months' time.
I think we said about when the profits are there, I think it's more than just the profits. I think it's when we start behaving in a way that doesn't really align to our core values and why we say we exist, which could be driven by profit. It could be a poor business decision. And I think where you said, Kev, your second point there was about when the organisation values are broken. I guess what happens in that instance? What do we do? And I guess this is a sign of culture that exists. Do we leave? Do we continue and we drive lower levels of engagement? Have you heard about this project Dragonfly from Google? Have you read much about this? So Google it exists for access to information and the easiness to access information and free information and all this great stuff. And the Project Dragonfly was about building some search capabilities in China that had the ability to be censored, to omit certain words, to direct to pre-loaded and pre-planned websites. So there's a whole thing around government censoring. Google started this piece of work, but actually, so that goes against the values. So you could argue this is the social good, the social value we're offering. But the employees have almost turned around and held the organisation to account. So there's been open letters written by the engineers, saying that they don't agree with it. It's not the right thing that we should be doing. There's a bit of a call out there. And I quite like this. It's our cumulative way of being. I think there's how are we perceived externally? What do we do around it? But I think that's a real sign of internally that maybe they've got something right around this, because it's not just words. It's not a day out of the office. It's fundamental. This is why we exist. And actually, we're doing things right now that don't match that don't contribute towards social good. What happens in that moment? And actually what's happened there is the organisation has turned around and the employees have held the organisation to account. So I think we might have had senior leaders at the top have made a call, and we might be tempted to say, well, that's Google's call, but actually the Google as a cumulative behaviour has said, hang on, this isn't right. We need to consider this.
I like that the top team are turning around in essence and saying to the troops, by all means, hold us accountable to the standards that we promote.
Don't know how this has ended. It's gone on for a while, and I'd be quite interested to know a bit more about it. You're right, they could have said, hold us to account, or actually, the reason for existing is so clear and so understood that it's almost that they don't have to ask. Do you know what I mean? People are so aligned to it, maybe they've just proactively kind of done it. I think it was quite interesting we said about the values being broken, and in this instance, it's not about profits, it's not about that, it's just we're doing something that doesn't match really why we say we exist and possibly why you're here with us. What do you do in that moment? And I think that's a great example of it's organically held to account.
It is fascinating, this. The NBA had a situation relatively recently where when the Hong Kong protests were going on, primarily around things, for example, like deportation. So China wanted to be able to deport people that it wanted to China, which basically meant if you were a protester, you weren't probably long for this world. So there was a whole load of rioting that we know about. Now, one of the NBA managers, leaders, that organisation, tweeted support for the Hong Kong protesters. And when he did this, there was a lot of agreement. Everybody went, yes, absolutely right. It's terrible. But China started to react because there is a huge amount of money in China because they go over there and they tour and they sell their merchandise over there. And it's a massive market. China reacted by starting to cancel some of their tour dates, and the NBA reacted by coming out officially and having NBA players of the highest level making comments such as, we completely support China, China's a great country, we love everything that's China. Now, that to me is a very, very large example, which is completely indicating that they are morally bereft and that they are absolutely driven by that financial need. And what they're doing is that they're enforcing behaviour from people that within the organisation to fulfil their need to be in China. Unless the grassroots people, unless people that go to their games vote with their feet and go, we're not going to go and we're going to punish you by non-attendance for what you're doing over there. There are these examples of where organisations don't have a social conscience, and maybe not so much they're above the law, but they believe that they are not needing to operate to add value other than to themselves.
I think I'm in agreement now. I know we're getting towards the end. I think for me, when we're looking at
why are we? You always say that.
Why are we what?
We could go on for another 2 hours, mate.
You guys feel free to do that. I've got a book to read, but I think there is,
and do read it, Stu, because you might be in.
I heard they're going to do that.
Do you know what? As a point of principle, 20 years from now, I'm still not read it. I'm not going to read it.
Of course. I've actually read it 3 times, but I'm not going to admit to that.
I'm never going to tell you.
Stu, I've got a tip for you. Ask Guy to send you the digital version, and then you can just do a Control F on your name.
I'll do that. Two things. I think there's one is when we talk about social good and values, I think what happens is we're quite often looking at organisations, their behaviours through the values that we hold that's important. So I don't think it's always that they believe they're above social good or they're not. I think just sometimes maybe the values that they operate to are different to ours, and sometimes that requires a lot of curiosity in our own frame of reference to consider that. Do you know what I mean? And I think the other thing for me is, and I love that, what's our cumulative way of being? And I think if our cumulative way of being is to do socially good, that tends to be what will happen around us, and you'll find lots of examples of that. If it's just a value that we say, and I think that goes back to the corporate social responsibility, and that's how we view it, it's 2 days out of the office, then the chances are you're not going to see a lot of demonstrable behaviours that support your contribution to social goodness around you.
Can you remember the organisation that I think had the motto, do no harm? Was that Google?
I'm going to very quickly find out.
I seem to remember, don't be evil. That's it.
So I've got it. So it's in Google, yeah. Corporate Code of Conduct. Don't be evil.
I'm looking at something here which was 2018, and Google removes don't be evil clause from its code of conduct. So Google's unofficial motto has long been the simple phrase don't be evil, but that's over. According to the code of conduct that Google distributes to its employees, the phrase was removed sometime in late April or early May, archives hosted by the Wayback Machine show. Don't be evil has been part of the company's corporate code of conduct since 2000. When Google was reorganized under a new parent company, Alphabet, in 2015, Alphabet assumed a slightly adjusted version of the motto, which was do the right thing. However, Google retained its original don't be evil language until the past several weeks. I think there's something about that toning down. There is something about that. It's a standard that's a little bit too high to be held to. And I get
Guy, it's not. Are you saying that don't do evil is a standard too high to be held up to?
I'm wondering if that's what they think.
No, absolutely not. And for me, that's not a slight adjustment. That's a massive adjustment. There's a whole range of stuff in between don't do evil and do the right thing. There's, I can bend a rule. Well, don't forget the best people in this world are rule breakers or rule benders. All of that stuff is in between those 2 points in the spectrum. So I think that's a massive shift. I get don't do evil because you're a bunch of talented workforce people that can be very creative, but don't do evil. I get it. But at the other end of the spectrum, actually, you can't have any chance of doing evil if we just swap that to do the right thing. I would join up to do the right thing any day of the week.
Yeah, I would. We'll see this a lot when people will show you their organisational values and code of conduct and all that kind of stuff. I have seen so many iterations of do the right thing, and I don't want to quote them exactly because the clients we might have worked for, but I think that's almost it's quite a generic statement. I think there is a lot, you can go and Google this, a lot of organisations, how similar values they have. Operate with integrity and all this kind of stuff. But I think it's what do we do that demonstrates it? So I quite like the do no evil. But I think, one of the points you raised earlier on about as an organisation grows and it gets bigger, how do you keep yourself aligned to maybe some of the things that caused us to get to where we are right now? Maybe that's a good example there where things have changed. Maybe not for the better. I don't know. But I guess for me, I quite do no evil. I could get behind that.
I'm seeing a lot of people on LinkedIn now that are saying things like, we've completely changed now in this lockdown. People want different things. People have loved being with their family and they realise that life is more important than just work and all of these things. The truth of the matter is, the second the commercial engine kicks in, especially with the amount of pressure that organisations will be under to either regain market share just to survive, I actually think that these very laudable lockdown lamentations that people have will very quickly be put under pressure back in the boardroom by people that are fundamentally driven by that financial driver and need. We'll see how that pans out, and that will be something for us to comment on further podcasts.
I hope it doesn't. Let's just see.
Where have we got to as a conclusion on that original question at the start?
I think all three of us agreed that no, companies do not believe that they are above social good, but they start doing social harm when they start compromising their own standards, stated or unstated.
And I'm also going to say that I think social harm can be at that large global entity level, but it can also be at that local level of just the way that you have an environment that either enables or disables the people that you've got within it. So I think that's two levels almost to consider. Okay, Stu, anything from you before we close?
No, I think beautiful summary, actually, Kev. We'll kind of wrap that up. I'm done, huh?
Nailed it, mate.
I did.
Nailed
That's
it. Boom.
Well, thank you to you two for contributing 3/4 of the other stuff.
You're like the guy at the back of the... He's going, one time.
Do you know what? No, he's like,
That's his contribution. The band are playing and he's just at the back, you know.
I think he's like a wise owl, a very wise owl. Doesn't say a lot, but when he says it, God, it has an impact and makes you think. That's him in the back.
I know. I'm going to pull this to a close. Great to again to connect with you all, and I'll see you on the next one.
Nice one.
Cheers, thank you.
Thank you, Stu. Thank you, Guy.
Nice, gents.
Thank you. Okay, that's the episode completed. Corporate social responsibility. Very much enjoyed recording it. Great fun. And as always, it really helps us reinforce our thinking. Stu's never going to read the book. I think I'm just going to have to come to terms with that. Though secretly, I believe he has. He's just never going to admit to it, though. If you've enjoyed the episode and you're enjoying the podcast as a whole, let me know. Make contact. I'd love to hear your thoughts and any ideas that you have for people that we might want to speak to. Once again, that final call to arms to tell people about the podcast Leadership Bites. That'd be great if you can. Every little bit helps. On that note, looking forward to having you on the next one. Take care. That's it. Subscribe so you keep updated on new episodes. Visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with us and find out more. This has been Leadership Bites. See you soon.